What I wanted to get started with, so I guess first and foremost, can everybody see my screen? I guess let's do the same thing as before. Everybody put something in chat, and let's see if we're good. Excellent. Looks like we're rolling. So what I wanted to talk about here is I'm calling it data democratization. It's about cross-database joins, but cross-database joins are the tool to get there, not the outcome. And so the outcome is, how can we help democratize the use of data in everybody's organizations? And obviously this is what we're striving for to do with Tableau. But historically, there have been a lot of challenges around the preparation of data, as we know, and that's the reason why Maestro was introduced, and that's the reason we use tools like Alteryx out there. So one of the things that I'm going to be talking about here is how we can use Tableau today to help us close a lot of those gaps on the data side. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started here. Sorry, I'm trying to click on my next slide. So this is about me. So I have actually been in business intelligence and data warehousing for about 15 years, worked on a lot of different tool stacks prior to Tableau. We do a lot of backend technology and things like that. Here's my contact info. It'll be on the last slide as well. About what we do at DIGR. So I started DIGR about 5 years ago, and we do effectively everything Tableau, everything from architecture. We lead Tableau implementations and ramp-ups. We support Tableau server infrastructure and so on and so on. And we also do a lot of the back-end work, which we're going to be talking about a little bit here today. So self-service. As you guys know, we're all Tableau users here. It is absolutely better than ever with the advent and the ramp up of Tableau. The transformative effects that it's had on organizations have been really amazing, and as we all know, obviously, and it is absolutely better than ever. So, for new features, the most underhyped new feature that we have in here is cross-database joins. And for anybody who doesn't know about it or is in the IT space and knows what it is, and so cross-database joins is what they call data federation. There are a number of other data federation tools that have been on the market for a few years that do something similar to what Tableau does, but they don't obviously do it natively inside of Tableau, and so that's the great thing about it. And the other thing that I'll call out here is from being out in the field a lot, most people don't know what cross-database joins are. They don't know why they would use it or even that it's there. And they have been available since Tableau 10. So these were actually introduced just before TC16, and so I think it actually went into beta around middle of last summer, and they actually released, I think, like a couple of days before Tableau Conference 16. So before we go in and talk about why we care about cross-database joins, I'm going to walk you through a real-world scenario here. See if anybody knows anything about this. So we were helping a customer with a big data warehousing project, and this was a project that actually took multiple years, end to end, and there was obviously a lot of people involved, and they had a great project plan, and all of this stuff was great, right? There was a lot of people involved, a lot of different groups, from architecture to BA to ETL and testing, and you name it. All of these tasks, they had distinct roles in the organization. And then obviously after we got through all of the build, we did all of the development, all of the analysis, there was lots of testing and more testing and even more testing, and everybody documented everything, right? Great. Sounds like a typical big company project. Well, we launched, but so you're going to be surprised about this because this never happens. Some requirements were missed. Now, I know this is a shock to you guys because you've probably never seen this before, but throughout this whole multi-year project, all the development, all the testing, it finally gets into the hands of the users, and the user says, well, but I really wanted this, and it's not here, right? And throughout that entire process, requirements that user was never talked to, or those requirements were never dragged out of that user to figure out what is it that person really needs to be able to do their job, right? Didn't happen. So why? There can be all sorts of reasons as to why we were not able to get those requirements out of that person or to build them. It could be because you didn't get to talk to that person. It could be because you just didn't even know that that person was part of that business process, which goes to that stakeholders didn't have the whole pictures. Or it could just it could be because they basically ran out of time. It could be because we said, hey, we have X number of months budgeted. We laid out the project plan, and we had to make some cuts because we didn't put enough money or enough time in this project to be able to deliver on this. And so what happens? Well, the user doesn't get what they need, right? And so what was missed? So this sounds really simple, right? We missed a couple of tables. Problem is, in old world BI, in waterfall style projects, this is a big deal. This could be a multi-month effort to go back and do the development, do the testing for it, release that into production, and for a business user, that's a big deal. 4 to 6 months is, that's almost half of a year, right? So if you needed something done this year, this doesn't do you any good to have it done in 6 months, right? It's kind of useless at that point. So as you know, the business needs are still unmet, but the biggest problem for a lot of organizations here is that whenever this happens, which this happens on every single big company project, IT is seen as the roadblock. And IT is the roadblock because IT wasn't able to deliver on it. IT wasn't able to figure out that the customer needed it. Whatever the problem is, the perception is that IT is just not delivering, right? And this is bad for everybody, especially the IT department. So when the business user still can't answer questions, what happens? Shadow IT forms. Tableau usage picks up in the organization, which is exactly what we want to happen. But if Tableau is not already adopted there, you get lots and lots of spread marks. And this is something that even in Tableau heavy organizations, we still see a lot of, where departments will have very, very large groups of spreadsheets that they use to do to run their business on a day in and day out basis. So if they're not Tableau heavy, that still happens pervasively. And then of course, how do you get there? Data dumps into Excel. And sometimes they use Tableau to do that. Sometimes they'll use a SQL tool to do that. Sometimes they might use an ETL tool. But the fact is that the end point for all of this data is Excel for most of these people. And the problem whenever this happens, whenever your data is into Excel, you don't have any governance or any process around how to actually manage your data. So if somebody is doing manual work in Excel and they're running that up the flagpole to their management, they said, hey, look at this great analysis that we just did. There's frankly not very often that testing happens, and there's I don't know that I've actually ever seen an instance where there was any governance, where somebody actually came in there and said, hey, we already have this calculation somewhere. Is this calculation the same thing as what we're doing elsewhere? I don't believe I've actually ever seen that happen in an example where people are dumping data to Excel. So why are we talking about this stuff? Well, we're talking about this because cross-database joins can help us solve these problems. So there's a lot of instances here where we may not need to do ETL. So in the example that I was talking about here earlier, this was a real world project that we worked on. And what actually happened here was there was a table that was missed. And in order to bring that table into the database, we actually used Tableau cross database joins to do that. So we actually sourced one table, one spreadsheet as a table, brought that into the model. And therefore, this ETL estimate that we were talking about, this 4 to 6 months estimate, was not necessary at all. We were actually doing this live in Tableau, and we were able to actually deliver the business's needs in the matter of a couple of days to actually go through all of the requirements and modeling and everything, rather than having to wait another half a year before we could deliver it. And of course, the business is happy because they get what they wanted, and IT is happy because the business isn't trying to do data dumps out of Tableau or out of their SQL tools, which is kind of a pain for everybody. So, cross database joins, how does it work? So, if you haven't used it before, you can bring in different databases into the same data source. And the interesting thing here is, you might be, if you've never used cross database joins, you're probably sitting here thinking, well, we've been able to do that for a long time with data blending. This is different than data blending. It does not work the same way, and we'll go into a little bit of those differences here in a little bit. But the really important thing here with cross-database joins is that you can publish these as a single data source. So if a user is going to go build a Tableau dashboard, they don't have to connect to two different data sources and then figure out how they're related. They're going to pull down one data source, and it's going to have all of the different database data in it from the various sources, and they're going to use it as one cohesive thing. And that also means that any calculated fields that we create that are going to leverage that are basically going to span data sources, they don't have to worry about those not working like they do with data blending. So how does it work? So this is a screenshot from the Tableau data source design tool. So what you can see here, this very first data source in the upper right, this is from SQL Server, and this is colored in blue. This guy is in orange, and this is from MySQL, and this is green, and this is from a text file. And if for anybody who's done any work in the designer, this behaves exactly like it does if you had a single data connection. So if we were getting everything from SQL Server, this is absolutely no different. The way that the joins are defined, the way that the data type rules are defined, this is exactly the same. The difference is that Tableau is going to pull each one of these tables in on its own, the entire table. It's going to pull that into the Tableau data engine, and it's going to do the join there, rather than doing the join in the database layer, which is what it would have done otherwise if the data was there. So that's the big call out. So about data blending, this doesn't make data blending go away. Data blending is still very much a thing. There's going to be lots of use cases to do it over cross-database joins. One of those big ones is going to be data sizes. So the important thing to note here is between data blending and cross-database joins, the order of operations in which they work. So with data blending, if you have two data sources, and then you're going to blend those together inside of a Tableau desktop, those data sources are aggregated before they're joined. And so if we have, we have some granular level of detail on one side that's like order lines, for example, line items, and on the other side, maybe we have something like customer complaints. The only thing that those are going to roll up to is maybe like a product and a time. That you can't join those on a more granular level of detail. And so what does this mean? Well, for data blending, this is going to roll up those order lines to the appropriate level of detail that matches the other data source before it does that join. Cross-database joins will do the opposite. Cross-database joins is going to do just like it would do in SQL, and it's going to bring that in at the most granular level of detail before it comes into your query. And so the reason we call this out is there's a lot of use cases that we can't really use data blending for, but we can use cross-database joins for to be able to do something very similar. So what about ETL? So if there's anybody in IT, we're probably sitting here thinking about, this sounds scary. We should really be putting this into our ETL pipelines. So long term, I would agree with that. We should be putting those into our ETL pipelines. For all of these reasons, we still want a single version of the truth. We still want this to fit into our existing support structure and all of that stuff. If we already have a sysops team or a data integration team that's already actively supporting our data warehouse infrastructure, you probably want them to continue doing that. And so what that means for cross-database joins, this is kind of a stopgap. So for what we have here, there are some limitations with what we can do with cross-database joins. So you cannot do cube data sources. So you can't do like analysis services or Cognos cubes or anything like that. Splunk, Google Analytics, Firebird, and other Tableau data sources you cannot currently do cross-database joins with. I think some of these things might be on the roadmap to be able to close those gaps. But really, what that means, for the most part, whenever we're doing cross-database joins, we're limited to relational databases. Now, there's a huge number of databases out there that we can do this with, and also flat files. But anything that requires like a custom web connector, like Google Analytics or something like that, and I believe web data connectors might not be able to do it as well. I could be wrong about that, but anyway, those are some of the limitations with cross-database joins. So the problems that we have today are that we are practically constrained by the limits of the TDE, and which as everybody here should know, currently a TDE is limited to about 8 billion tuples, and there's also a hard limit of approximately 890 million rows of data. That's the maximum amount of data that a TDE can hold. And another one of the problems with the TDE is also with the ingestion speed. And I believe it was Russell Christopher a while back that actually did some pretty thorough testing around around what practical ingestion speeds that you can actually get into a TDE, and that's kind of been determined to be approximately 1 million rows per minute. There are some instances where you can get faster than that, but most of the real world scenarios where you're going to be using it, that's about the max speed that you're going to be able to go. And Hyper changes the game here. And obviously Hyper's not out yet. It's currently in beta. It looks like it's probably going to launch in Q1. And so whenever that happens, we can forget about all of these things, assuming that everybody upgrades. One of the other things that you do have to keep in mind here as well is because cross-database joins are doing this comparison, they're doing they're doing the join at the most granular level of detail. It can move a lot of data across the network. So if if one of our tables that we're bringing into our cross-database join is a 10 billion row table from Teradata or something like that, it'll pull all of those. It'll try to pull all of those 10 billion rows into Tableau in order to do that join. And assuming that Tableau can handle that, we also need to be thinking about, can our network handle it? And it's possible the answer to that is no. And it's not impossible, but depending on how your data structure is modeled, live connections are probably a bad idea, because it's actually going to go back and do basically full table scans against each one of these data sources. Now, if your tables are not enormous, if they're not billions of rows, it might not be a big deal, but that's definitely something to keep an eye on. And currently, there is no such thing as an in-database join. So even though we might have some data in Oracle on one side and Teradata on the other side, Tableau does not currently have the capability of pulling data from one and putting it to the other to do that join. This is something that's been being discussed for a while. I don't know of any concrete plans to actually be able to execute on that yet. So all of those joins still happen in Tableau. So interesting features. So this is a really neat one. Custom SQL as tables. We can also bring in flat files as if it was a table. And now one of the things that we can do that we could not do before is, if you have an Excel file, or if you have multiple Excel files that we're trying to bring into our model, before we couldn't do that. And with cross-database joins, we can, because each Excel file is its own data source. And the reason why custom SQL as tables is interesting is that we can actually, well, in a real world here, whenever you're doing cross-database joins, you're probably going to run into lots of scenarios where the data structures don't conform to one another; they just don't match, and we might be able to make them match with custom SQL. Now, generally, this is something that we advise against doing. We really don't want to see custom SQL in our Tableau data sources unless we absolutely have to. But if we're doing cross-database joins, this could be a great use case to be able to do that. If we have to, if we can write SQL against one of those or multiple of those different data providers to actually make them conform to one another, then this is a great way to do that. And we can use those as tables. So some other interesting ones, cross-database unions, where there are some databases where we can actually cross between, for example, Oracle and MySQL, and we can do wildcard pattern names for table matches. So if these guys are, so if, for example, if we had our production database in Oracle and we had our archival tables in SQL Server, for example, and these table names were similar, that we can do pattern matching to actually find those table names, you can do cross-database unions to bring those in. The other thing that's interesting, and I think this more recently came out, is the calculation in join. And so this is where we can actually write more complicated if statements. And I want to say this came out in 10.3 or 10.4 to actually perform our joins. And this is not specific to cross-database joins. This is a feature that works regardless, but this gets really interesting whenever we actually do have more complicated logic. This is going to eliminate some of the things that we would have to do, that we would have to pre-write SQL for. We can let Tableau write some of that for us. So Hyper. So if for anybody who's paying attention, Hyper is currently in beta, and it was obviously announced. It was announced at TC17. Hyper brings a lot of really interesting features that we don't have today in production. So ingestion speeds is one of the big wins. If you have used Hyper, the ingestion speed is multiples faster than a TDE. This is how quickly can we get data out of the database and into Tableau. Obviously, query speeds are also vastly improved. There are a lot of use cases where we've seen queries might take multiple minutes currently in Tableau and a TDE against big data sets, and we can do those in Hyper in the blink of an eye, amazingly fast. And there's also no hard limits on data volumes. So with TDE, we've got our 8 billion tuples limit, and we have our 890 million row limit. Those limits do not exist in Hyper. And from what I've gathered from talking to the Hyper developers, they are unaware of any hard or soft limitations in Hyper. And I believe there's actually been some testing that has been done against many billions of rows, and I don't exactly know what the number is, but I want to say that there were some trillion row data sets that were tested inside of Hyper, to effectively see if they could break it, and they were not able to break it with a trillion row data set. So what about governance? And so if there's any IT people in here, we're probably sitting in here thinking, wow, this sounds really bad, because if we're going to have users creating their own connections to our other databases, are they doing it correctly? Has this been tested? Can we support it? And all of these things, right? The need for governance doesn't go away. All of those are valid concerns. A lot of these, they are going to be a sign of organizational or standardization issues. If people are using database issues, there's a very good chance that you as an analyst might connect to the database and go, wow, I need to go get this data from somewhere else, but maybe you don't. Maybe that data does exist in your existing database and you just don't know where it is, or you don't know what it's called. And so these are certainly all valid concerns. So the great thing that we can do, because it's in Tableau, is we can track these database connections. So if you're publishing your stuff to Tableau server, we can figure out what data sources are connecting to what databases. We can inventory all of those things, and we can actually keep track of what our technical debt is. So if in the example that I was talking about, for the big project that we did last year, what we can do is, if we're bringing Excel files or flat files into our Tableau data sources, well, we can run queries and we can find those, and then we as IT, we can go and run queries against this and say, okay, where are all the areas where we are bringing in flat files or Excel files or doing cross-database joins? Because for IT, it's a good chance that that's technical debt. That's something that they need to build into their processes. They just haven't done it yet. And so the process is that we can find it, we can document it, we can review those, and then we can make plans to close those gaps on the back end, on the database side. But in the meantime, the great thing is that the users are not handcuffed by being able to use their data. So, is this self-service? So I call it self-service, but really, it's really Agile Analytics, and the reason why is because, in the grand scheme of things, we don't really care who does it. There's going to be a lot of organizations, and I think in the audience here for the TFF, most of the audience here is probably going to be more than comfortable doing their own cross-database joins and things like that, right? They're not going to have a problem with that, but there's going to be a lot of other organizations where the users may not be comfortable with doing that. And so the point here is that we don't really care whether it's the end user or the dashboard developer, whoever that does the cross-database joins, or whether it's IT. The point is that we can do it, and we can do it quickly with minimal friction. That's the takeaway here. And the result is the same, that the business can answer the questions. We're just trying to cut this, cut this timeline down that might be a 4 to 6 month cycle down to some more manageable amount of time that that the user can actually answer the questions with. And then the point here too, it can be easily moved to production, unlike if somebody's somebody's managing spread marks on their local machine, or they have a bunch of stuff in Excel. These are things that cannot be easily moved to production. You can't easily put a process around them. Cross database joins you can. That's the big win. So the real impact. So the dependency on doing the IT projects and getting them right, it is absolutely reduced, because there are a lot of instances where some of the IT projects that we end up getting involved in could be solved, or a lot of it could be solved with something like cross database joins. Now, not saying that that cross database joins are necessarily the right way to do it, but if you're a business user and you have a question and you have some answer that you can't get to, the important thing here is that you don't have to go to your manager and get a project funded in order to be able to get to your data. If you use cross database joins, you might be able to get to that without having to go do any of those things. Your speed to market is also greatly increased, mainly because of that. It's because you don't have this dependency of doing all of this back end work to be able to do the work you need to do. And of course, Agile Analytics, and it does reduce shadow IT here, because with what we're talking about in the shadow IT world, here, these guys are used to dumping things to Excel, and what we're doing here is we're able to eliminate that. We don't have to dump things to Excel in order to do the things that we need to do. And then it does improve governance for the same reason, because we're not dumping things to Excel. We are publishing things to Tableau server. So that means that we do have control over the software development lifecycle. We do have control over testing and things like that. And so this is a lot more of a stable, a governance, a governance ready process to actually be able to deliver on it. And then, of course, like we talked about, we're trying to get rid of selecting to Excel, because that's just a pain in everybody's a pain for everybody, right? So takeaways. So, and this is really speaking to IT. If there's any IT people here, we're trying to make sure that we're not standing in the way of business users, which is contrary to the way that a lot of IT organizations work with today. We're really trying to make sure that everybody's enabled, and we're trying to help the users. And so the point here is that your users they're going to find a way to do their job regardless of whether you help them or not. If somebody comes to an analyst and says, hey, I need an answer on XYZ and I need this by Friday, they're going to figure out a way to do that regardless, whether you help them or not, right? And so what we're doing here is we're going to enable them a way to actually get to to answer their questions without having to go to Excel, without having to do all of these rogue shadow IT processes. And for that reason, we can use this to help improve the relationship between business and IT. Because, like I alluded to earlier in the slides, currently in a lot of big projects, IT is seen as the roadblock, and frankly, there's not a great relationship between a lot of the big IT groups and the customers, the analysts, the people that are going to be the consumers of the data. And one of the big reasons why is because it does take a long time whenever there's a gap in requirements or something doesn't get delivered the way that the user needed it to be. IT's the roadblock. IT's terrible. Those things can greatly be minimized whenever we're using a process like this, because we can let IT do what they do, and then we can let cross database joins help close those gaps. And it does make the business more agile, obviously, because we can deliver things faster and get to the right answer quicker. So I actually kind of blew through those slides, so I'm actually at the end of my deck here. So if there are any outstanding questions here, I'll be happy to take them.
Yeah, so Eric, we've got a couple of questions in the Q&A, and I think one came through in the chat. Let me look for that. So in the chat, there's one that asks, did you say that Cognos is a tool that is inside that limitations tools?
No, no,
Okay, so
I don't think that Cognos specifically is, and I'm trying to think. I don't believe that there's a native connectivity to Cognos inside of Tableau. There might very well be some third-party tools that allow those connections to be able to pass into Cognos cubes. I know there are for business objects, but the reason I called that out is because there are some limitations that are specifically around that are specifically around connecting to cubes, and and there are some use cases with not only with analysis services, but with web intelligence on the business subject side, and with SAP BW, where those are things that we can't do today. And I think Cognos is probably one of those as well. Does that make sense?
Well, we'll see through the chat or any other questions that come up if anybody else has anything else on that point.
Excellent.
Another question is, it might not be related to your topic, but have you cross-joined 2 or more Tableau extract files? Is that even possible? Do you know?
Yeah. So that's something that is not possible today. So that was one of the things that I called out as far as its limitations. So you cannot join multiple Tableau data sources or multiple TDEs. That's not a thing that you can do in cross-database joins. So that is obviously something that you can do with data blending. But if we have an existing Tableau data source that's connected to a database, and then we want to blend that with some other table that's coming from somewhere else, that's not something that you can do today. I don't know whether that's something on the roadmap, but the way that you would do that today is to actually clone that data source, and you would do the cross database join inside of that data source and then republish that. Does that make sense?
Okay. And then there's actually a fair amount of conversation going on right now in the chat if you want to flip over to that, because they're
definitely
talking about Centaurus with a Cognos connector.
Yep.
So you might want to read that for a second and then chime in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So for Centaurus, this is not a tool that I've worked with before, so I don't know if there is a good answer for connecting to Cognos Cube. That's the short answer.
Okay. I think. Oh, and then Josh Tapley said that IBM tried to do a connection to TM1.
Right.
But OData connector that Tableau has is not compatible. So, and then they have somebody else said that they have a third-party vendor, Centaurus, that has developed a Tableau connector to Cognos. So.
Absolutely, and I would certainly I'd certainly reach out to them and see if there's any way they can help. The short answer is I don't have any idea if that's something that you would be able to use with cross database joins or not.
Okay, and then another question in our Q&A is from Jen Savini that asks, in corporate, how often do you find yourself doing cross-database joins? And who do you think is the audience for this feature? Small to large companies, from business to IT, etc.
So as far as how often people are doing cross-database joins in corporate, we actually see it quite a bit, and there's a few different reasons for it. One of the things that we actually see that was probably not really intended by Tableau, but so one of the limitations, I don't really want to call it a limitation. One of the things that we see that happens today is if somebody is on a database that's frankly not very fast, and you're doing a lot of joins. If you've got a Snowflake data model, you've just got a lot of tables that are involved in your data structure. It's very possible that database could take a very long time to return that answer just to be able to perform those joins. We've got some customers today that are doing this against Oracle data sources or SQL Server data sources, where these queries will take the database 4 or 5 hours to run, and these get done every single day, right? And so we have seen some use cases for cross database joins where we can effectively fool Tableau into how it writes SQL. And so if we can identify a bad spot in a big SQL statement that it's pushing to a database, and we say, we know that Oracle's really struggling with this part right here, we can use cross database joins to effectively fool it and send 2 different sets of SQL statements to the database that it ideally can run faster. And so this is something that we actually see used fairly common now, where we are basically migrating all of the joins that the database would have been doing and moving those into Tableau. And the way that you do that is effectively by setting up a bunch of different data connections inside of your data source editor, all connected to the same database. And currently, Tableau does not try to merge those. So if those are defined as separate data connections, even if they're using the same server address, even if they're using the same username and password, Tableau will fire a separate query for those. And so this is something that we actually see quite commonly in a lot of cases where if you've got a data set that's a multi-billion row data set. It's very possible, unless you're on a really fast database like Snowflake or Exasol or something like that, it's very possible that Tableau can do those joins more quickly inside of Tableau than the database can do them. And that's even more true now that, not now with Hyper. And I can actually see a lot more use cases like that coming out with Hyper. So that's kind of the first part of that, the first part of that answer around how we use it in corporate. And then obviously one of the other areas is in a more real world scenario where you actually need to go get data from another data source that you don't have. We do see it being used quite commonly, but I think one of the roadblocks right now is that a lot of people just don't even realize that you can do it. One of the great use cases that we were able to help a customer with earlier this year is that they already had a data warehouse. They had a lot of data in their data warehouse, which was great. But there was a big core element that they just did not have from their ERP system that they had never brought in. And so this was the exact same problem, kind of like I talked about earlier, in that, in order to do that, they needed to fund a project. They didn't have money in the budget to do it that year. So it was going to be at least a year, more likely 18 months out before they'd be able to answer the question. For the business, that's just not acceptable, right? So what we were able to do was we leveraged all of the data warehouse data that they already had, and we actually used cross-database joins to reach directly into their production ERP system. And they only needed a few bits of data out of that production ERP system to do what they needed to do, and we were able to do that. So this is a great example of how we can circumvent the entire ETL process to be able to make that happen. And we have seen some other examples of that. We've worked with some customers that actually have multiple independent data warehouse environments that, maybe they're on different platforms. You've got some stuff in Vertica, you've got some stuff in Oracle, you've got some stuff in Snowflake, and you just don't have everything in one place, and you need to go source data from another system without having to do that migration. That's something that we see it being used on a pretty regular basis for. So the next part of the question is, who's the audience? So I think the short answer is the audience is everyone, because small companies are going to be able to really take advantage of this to be able to answer the questions more quickly and be more agile. And frankly, if they're a small company, that they probably don't have big budgets, they don't have a lot of staff to be able to do things like this. So for them, this is going to be a great fit to be able to leverage cross database joins to help them do things faster. Likewise, large companies are also a great audience, because they're going to have more, they're going to have multiple databases, more complex structures, systems that don't talk to each other. They're just going to have more and more of that, and there's probably a lot more gaps out there. And there are a lot more gaps out there, regardless of whether the business knows it or not, or whether IT knows it or not. Those gaps are there. Every big company that we go into, there's one person in almost every department whose job is to produce a report, and their only job is to produce one report a month. This is what they do, and they do it in Excel, and it's a lot of manual data preparation. It's a lot of it's a lot of manual reporting and a lot of testing and all of these things. Most of these things that we're talking about here, we can find a way to pretty easily automate. And with cross-database joins, you don't necessarily have a lot of prerequisites to be able to do that. So the short answer to your question there is everyone is the audience. Everyone here is a great potential user for cross-database joins.
Okay, we also had another question. Can you leverage user prompts and parameters while also using cross-database joins?
Yep. You absolutely can, because whenever whenever you have ingested all of your data into your Tableau data source, it's now a single Tableau data source. So you can do anything in that data source that you can do, that you can do regardless of cross database joins or not. So yes, you can create as many calculated fields as you want to. You can do as many quick filters as you want to. You can create as many parameters as you want to. It makes no difference. Tableau doesn't care where your data came from. So that's the short answer to that. Does that make sense?
Okay, and then also just another note, Jen in the chat mentioned that CentOS provides a Cognos connector. When you check it out, ask about the desktop installer method of updates and security to Cognos SAP. It's important to see whether the server install of the driver matches with the authentication method of your environment. So just wanted to provide that out to you in case you weren't able to see the chat, and then also to share with others who are also on the phone. Thanks.
Great.
Let's see if we have any other questions or comments come in through the chat. Nothing yet. Of course, Eric, you're always available through Twitter. Absolutely. Or LinkedIn or email if anybody has follow-up questions. I want to thank you for being on the Tableau Fringe Festival today.
Yep, thank you for the invite, and it was fun, and let's do it again next year.